Billionaire CEO hires nanny for his daughter. He never expected to fall for the simple small-town girl. Hello, welcome. Leave a like, subscribe, activate notifications, and enjoy this story. Ethan stood in the silence of his grand estate, his daughter clinging to his side. The weight of loss suffocated him daily, a reminder of the wife he could never save. But as a billionaire CEO, showing vulnerability was never an option. He had built walls around his heart, hiding his pain behind boardroom meetings and cold transactions. Until one day, a small-town girl with a quiet smile entered their lives. Emily wasn't what anyone expected. A simple nanny with no glamorous background, no connection to the world Ethan inhabited. Yet, in the stillness of the mansion, she brought laughter to a place that had known only silence. His daughter, who hadn't smiled in months, began to blossom again under Emily's care. But as Ethan's guard begins to slip, emotions surface that he wasn't prepared to face. The stakes are high, higher than he ever imagined. Because behind Emily's kind eyes lies a secret that What happens when the most powerful man in the room faces something money can't fix? Love, trust, betrayal. Nothing is as it seems. And when the truth comes out, it may just be too late. Will Ethan risk everything for the chance at love, or will the past destroy them both? The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and fading flowers, as Ethan Blackwood stood motionless before the polished granite headstone. His tailored suit, usually a symbol of power and success, now seemed to hang heavily on his frame, as if weighed down by an invisible burden. Beside him, his 5-year-old daughter, Lily, clutched a crushed daisy in her tiny fist, her eyes fixed on the ground. "Daddy," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustling leaves. "When is Mummy coming back?" The question was like a knife to Ethan's heart, twisting with merciless precision. He knelt beside his daughter, struggling to find words that could soften the harsh reality of their loss. "Sweetheart," he began, his voice catching. Mommy can't come back. But she's always watching over us, just like the stars at night." Lily's lower lip trembled, and she dropped the crumpled flower onto the fresh dirt. "But I want her here," she said, her words dissolving into quiet sobs. Ethan pulled her close, feeling her small body shake against his chest. He closed his eyes, willing himself to be strong for her, even as his own grief threatened to consume him. The weight of guilt pressed down on him, memories of missed dinners and broken promises flooding his mind. How many times had he chosen work over family, thinking there would always be more time? Now time had become his cruelest enemy. As they stood there, locked in the embrace that seemed to hold their broken world together, the shrill ring of Ethan's cell phone shattered the somber silence. He flinched, recognizing the ringtone reserved for urgent business matters. For a moment, he was tempted to ignore it, to stay in this bubble of grief with his daughter. But old habits die hard, and the call of duty was deeply ingrained. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he murmured, gently disentangling himself from Lily's arms. "Daddy has to take this call. It's important." Lily's face crumpled, a fresh wave of tears spilling down her cheeks. "You always say that," she whimpered, turning away from him. The words stung, but Ethan forced himself to focus on the call. "Blackwood speaking," he said, his voice automatically shifting into its usual authoritative tone. As he listened to the urgent report of a potential crisis at one of his company's overseas branches, Ethan's eyes remained fixed on Lily. She had wandered a few steps away, her small fingers tracing the letters on her mother's headstone. The sight made his chest tighten, a physical manifestation of the chasm growing between them. "I understand," he said into the phone, his mind already racing with potential solutions. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Have the team assembled and ready to brief me." Ending the call, Ethan took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he knew would be another disappointment for Lily. He approached her slowly, kneeling once again to meet her eyes. "Lily, sweetheart," he began, his voice gentle but firm. "Daddy has to go to the office for a little while. There's an emergency that needs my attention." Lily's eyes, so like her mother's, filled with a mixture of hurt and resignation that no 5-year-old should ever have to feel. "You're always leaving," she said quietly, her words carrying a wisdom beyond her years. Ethan felt as if he'd been struck. He opened his mouth to protest, to make promises he knew he might not be able to keep, but the words died on his lips. Instead, he pulled out his phone again, this time to make a different kind of call. "Hello, is this Emily Parker?" he asked, watching Lily as she turned back to the headstone. "This is Ethan Blackwood. I understand you're available for immediate childcare? Yes, I need someone right away. The address is Oak Grove Cemetery, Section 14. Can you be here in 10 minutes? "Excellent, thank you." As he ended the call, Ethan felt a mix of relief and unease. He'd never met this Emily Parker, but her agency came highly recommended, and he was out of options. He turned back to Lily, who was now sitting cross-legged in front of the grave, her small fingers plucking at the grass. "Lily," he said softly, "someone is coming to stay with you for a little while. Her name is Emily, and she's very nice. I promise I'll be back as soon as I can." Lily didn't respond, didn't even look at him. The silence was deafening, filled with all the words they couldn't say to each other. 10 minutes later, a modest sedan pulled up to the cemetery gates. A young woman stepped out, her simple sundress and cardigan a stark contrast to the sleek luxury cars that usually populated Ethan's world. She approached cautiously, her eyes taking in the scene before her with a mix of compassion and uncertainty. "Mr. Blackwood?" she asked, her voice soft and tinged with a slight southern accent. "I'm Emily Parker." Ethan nodded, relief washing over him despite the lingering guilt. "Thank you for coming so quickly, Miss Parker. This is my daughter, Lily. I have an urgent matter at the office, and I need you to stay with her until I return." Emily's gaze shifted to Lily, and something in her expression softened. She knelt down beside the little girl, not minding the damp grass staining her dress. "Hi there, Lily," she said gently. "Is it okay if I sit with you for a while?" For the first time since the phone call, Lily looked up. Her eyes, red-rimmed and wary, met Emily's. After a moment of hesitation, she gave a tiny nod. Ethan watched the interaction with a mixture of gratitude and an emotion he couldn't quite name. There was something about Emily's presence, unassuming yet comforting, that seemed to ease the tension in the air. "I'll be back as soon as I can," he said, more to himself than to either of them. As he turned to leave, he caught a glimpse of Emily gently placing her hand on Lily's shoulder, leaning in to whisper something that made the corners of his daughter's mouth twitch upward. The drive to the office was a blur of conflicting emotions. Ethan's mind raced with thoughts of the impending crisis, strategies and contingencies already forming. But beneath it all, a current of unease and longing pulled at him. The image of Lily and Emily at the graveside haunted him, a stark reminder of what he was leaving behind. Hours later, crisis averted and deals salvaged, Ethan found himself standing at the front door of his expansive mansion. The sun had long since set, and a chill had settled in the air. As he turned his key in the lock, a sound from inside made him pause. Laughter. Lily's laughter, bright and clear, in a way he hadn't heard since before. Ethan pushed the door open quietly, following the sound to the living room. There, on the hardwood floor, sat Lily and Emily, surrounded by a sea of colored paper and crayons. They were bent over a large sheet, giggling as they drew what appeared to be a field of wildly colorful flowers. "And this one," Lily was saying, her voice animated in a way Ethan had almost forgotten, "is a super-duper sparkle daisy. It can grant wishes." Emily gasped in exaggerated wonder. "A wish-granting daisy? That's amazing. What would you wish for, Lily?" The question hung in the air for a moment, and Ethan found himself holding his breath. Lily's smile faltered for just a second before she answered, "I'd wish for Daddy to be home more." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He must have made a sound, because suddenly both Lily and Emily were looking up at him. Emily's eyes widened in surprise, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. But it was Lily's expression that truly caught him off guard. For just a moment, as their eyes met, Ethan saw a flicker of the carefree little girl she used to be. Then, as if remembering herself, Lily's face clouded over, and she looked away. "Mr. Blackwood," Emily said, quickly getting to her feet. "I didn't hear you come in. Lily and I were just—" "Drawing flowers," Ethan finished for her, his voice rougher than he intended. "I can see that." An awkward silence fell over the room. Ethan found himself at a loss for words, caught between the joy of seeing Lily happy and the guilt of knowing he wasn't the one to bring that happiness. Emily seemed to sense the tension. She began gathering up the scattered art supplies, her movements quick and efficient. "We had a lovely afternoon," she said, her voice warm despite the awkwardness. "Lily is quite the artist." Ethan nodded, his eyes still on his daughter. "Thank you, Miss Parker, for everything. I appreciate you stepping in on such short notice." Emily smiled, a genuine expression that seemed to light up her whole face. "It was my pleasure, Mr. Blackwood. Lily is a wonderful child." As Emily prepared to leave, Ethan found himself reluctant to see her go. There was something about her presence that had brought a warmth to the house, a feeling he hadn't realized was missing until now. "Miss Parker," he said just as she reached the door, Would you be interested in a more permanent position? As Lily's nanny?" The words surprised even him, but as soon as they were out, Ethan knew they were right. Emily turned back, her eyes wide with surprise and something else. Hope, perhaps. Yes, she said after a moment. "Yes, I would be honored." As Emily left, promising to return the next day to discuss details, Ethan turned back to the living room. Lily was still sitting on the floor, her small hands tracing the outlines of the flowers they had drawn. Ethan sat down beside her, his expensive suit crinkling as he folded his long legs. "Those are beautiful flowers, sweetheart," he said softly. "Did you have fun with Miss Emily?" Lily nodded, not looking up. "She's nice," she said quietly. "She doesn't make me talk if I don't want to." The simple statement hit Ethan hard, making him realize how little he truly knew about his daughter's needs. He reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind Lily's ear. "I'm glad you like her," he said. "Would you like it if she came to stay with us for a while? To be your nanny?" For the first time that evening, Lily looked directly at him. Her eyes, so much like her mother's, searched his face as if looking for something. "Will you still be here?" she asked, her voice small and vulnerable. Ethan felt his heart break and mend in the same moment. He pulled Lily into his arms, holding her close as he whispered, "I promise, sweetheart, I'll be here. We'll figure this out together." As he held his daughter, Ethan's gaze fell on the drawing of the wish-granting daisy. In that moment, he made a silent vow to be the father Lily deserved, to honor the memory of his wife by cherishing the precious gift she had left him. Little did he know that this decision, this moment of connection, was just the beginning. The arrival of Emily Parker in their lives would set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything Ethan thought he knew about love, trust, and the true meaning of family. As the night settled around them, father and daughter sat together, surrounded by paper flowers and the tentative hope of new beginnings. And somewhere, just beyond the veil of this world, a mother's spirit smiled upon them, knowing that healing had finally begun. The early morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan Blackwood's home office, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floor. Ethan sat at his desk, his eyes fixed on the computer screen before him, but his mind was elsewhere. The faint sound of laughter drifted in from the garden, a melodic reminder of the changes that had taken place in his household over the past few weeks. With a sigh, he pushed back from the desk and walked to the window. Outside, he could see Lily and Emily engaged in what appeared to be an intense game of hide-and-seek among the carefully manicured hedges. Lily's giggles, once so rare, now filled the air with a frequency that both warmed and unsettled Ethan's heart. As he watched, Emily emerged from behind a large topiary, scooping Lily up in her arms and spinning her around. The little girl's squeals of delight echoed across the lawn, and Ethan found himself smiling despite the nagging unease in the pit of his stomach. There was no denying that Emily's presence had brought a light back into their lives. Lily was happier, more talkative, and even sleeping through the night without nightmares. And Ethan, well, he couldn't ignore the way his pulse quickened whenever Emily entered a room, or how he found himself looking forward to their brief interactions at the end of each day. But with this newfound warmth came a host of complications that Ethan was ill-equipped to handle. The whispers at board meetings, the raised eyebrows at charity galas, the not-so-subtle hints from his mother about appropriate company, all served as constant reminders of the gulf between his world and Emily's. A sharp knock at the door jolted Ethan from his reverie. "Come in," he called, turning away from the window. His assistant, a crisp and efficient woman in her 50s, entered with a stack of folders. "Mr. Blackwood, the files you requested on the Parker girl," she said, her tone neutral, but her eyes betraying a hint of curiosity. Ethan felt a twinge of guilt as he accepted the folders. "Thank you, Margaret. That'll be all." As the door closed behind her, Ethan sank back into his chair, staring at the innocuous-looking folders as if they might bite. He had told himself it was standard procedure, a necessary precaution when bringing someone new into their lives. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. It was fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of being hurt, fear of losing control. With a deep breath, he opened the first folder. Emily's resume stared back at him, a document he had already memorized. Small-town girl from Georgia, excellent references from her previous employers, glowing recommendations from her professors at the state university where she'd studied child psychology. But it was the next folder that made Ethan's blood run cold. A police report dated 3 years ago. Emily's name, alongside words like suspect and person of interest. The details were vague, but the implications were clear. There was more to Emily Parker than met the eye. Ethan's mind raced. Should he confront her, fire her immediately? The thought of Lily's heartbreak at losing Emily made his chest tighten, and if he was being honest with himself, the idea of Emily leaving made him ache in a way he hadn't felt since losing his wife. A soft knock at the door interrupted his spiraling thoughts. "Mr. Blackwood?" Emily's voice called from the other side. "Lily's asking if you'd like to join us for a picnic lunch." Ethan quickly shoved the folders into a drawer. I'll be right there," he called back, his voice sounding strained even to his own ears. As he made his way downstairs, Ethan's mind was a battlefield of conflicting emotions. The sight that greeted him in the kitchen only added to his turmoil. Emily stood at the counter, her hair slightly disheveled from playing outside, a smudge of flour on her cheek as she packed sandwiches into a wicker basket. Lily sat at the island, swinging her legs and chattering animatedly about the fairy house they were planning to build that afternoon. The domesticity of the scene struck Ethan like a physical blow. This was everything he had ever wanted for Lily, for himself, a happy home, filled with laughter and love. And yet, the shadow of what he had just discovered loomed large. "Daddy!" Lily exclaimed, jumping down from her stool to hug him. "You're really coming with us?" Ethan forced a smile, ruffling his daughter's hair. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, Princess." His eyes met Emily's over Lily's head, and for a moment he saw something flicker in their depths, a vulnerability, a hint of, was it guilt? But then she smiled, warm and genuine, and the moment passed. "I hope you like peanut butter and jelly, Mr. Blackwood," Emily said, her southern lilt more pronounced than usual. Lily insisted it was the only proper picnic food. "It's perfect," Ethan replied, surprised to find he meant it. As they made their way out to the garden, Ethan couldn't help but notice the way Emily's sundress swayed in the breeze, or how her laughter seemed to blend perfectly with Lily's. He found himself relaxing despite his earlier discoveries, drawn into their little world of make-believe and simple pleasures. They spread the blanket under an old oak tree, its branches providing a canopy of dappled shade. As they ate, Lily regaled them with stories of the fairies that she was certain lived in the garden, her imagination running wild. Emily listened with rapt attention, asking questions and adding her own embellishments to the tales. Ethan found himself watching them, struck by how natural they looked together. It was as if Emily had always been a part of their lives, filling a void he hadn't even realized was there. "Mr. Blackwood," Emily's voice broke through his thoughts. "You've barely touched your sandwich. Is everything all right?" Ethan blinked, realizing he had been staring. "Yes," Sorry, just lost in thought, I suppose. And please, call me Ethan. Mr. Blackwood makes me feel like my father." Emily's smile widened, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "Ethan, then," she said softly. The way she said his name sent a shiver down his spine, and for a moment, Ethan forgot about police reports and background checks. He forgot about social expectations and class differences. In that moment, under the old oak tree with Lily's laughter surrounding them, Ethan allowed himself to imagine a future where moments like this were the norm. But as the afternoon wore on and they made their way back to the house, reality began to creep back in. The folders in his desk drawer seemed to call to him, demanding action. The weight of his responsibilities, both to Lily and to his family's legacy, settled heavily on his shoulders once more. That evening, after Lily had been tucked into bed with a new fairy tale courtesy of Emily, Ethan found himself standing in the hallway outside the guest room that had become Emily's. He raised his hand to knock, questions and accusations warring on his tongue. But before he could make contact with the door, he heard a muffled sound from within. Was that crying? Ethan's hand froze mid-air as he listened. The soft sobs continued, punctuated by what sounded like whispered words. "I'm sorry," he heard Emily's voice, thick with tears. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." Ethan's heart clenched. Who was she talking to? What was she sorry for? The mystery surrounding Emily Parker deepened, and Ethan found himself more conflicted than ever. As he turned away from the door, retreating to the solitude of his study, Ethan knew that decisions would have to be made. But for now, the memory of Lily's laughter and the warmth of Emily's smile warred with the cold facts in those damning folders. The coming days would test not only Ethan's judgment, but his heart as well. Little did he know that the truth, when it finally came to light, would shake the very foundations of the life he had so carefully rebuilt. The soft glow of the desk lamp cast long shadows across Ethan's study as he sat, hunched over the scattered documents before him. The tick of the antique grandfather clock in the corner seemed to echo his racing heartbeat, each second bringing him closer to a decision he wasn't sure he could make. His eyes scanned the police report for what felt like the 100th time, searching for some detail he might have missed, some explanation that could ease the knot of anxiety in his chest. The words suspect and accessory jumped out at him, stark and damning against the crisp white paper. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, disheveling the usually impeccable style. How had he ended up here? Just a few short weeks ago, his biggest concern had been balancing board meetings with Lily's school events. Now, he found himself playing amateur detective, trying to unravel the mystery that was Emily Parker. A soft knock at the door made him start, quickly shuffling the papers into a folder. "Come in," he called, his voice rougher than he intended. The door creaked open, and Emily's head poked in, her smile warm but tinged with concern. "I'm sorry to bother you so late, Mr. Blackwood. I mean, Ethan," she corrected herself, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "I just wanted to let you know that Lily's finally asleep. She had another nightmare, but we talked it through and she seems okay now." Ethan felt a pang of guilt. He should have been there for his daughter, not holed up in his study obsessing over Emily's past. "Thank you, Emily," he said softly. "I don't know what we'd do without you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Emily's eyes met his, and for a moment, Ethan saw something flicker in their depths, a vulnerability, a longing that mirrored his own. "It's my pleasure," Emily replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She's special. You both are." Before Ethan could respond, Emily had slipped back out, closing the door quietly behind her. He stared at the closed door, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. On one side, there was the Emily he knew, kind, compassionate, the woman who had brought light back into their lives. On the other, there was the Emily from the police report, a mystery, a potential threat to everything he held dear. With a heavy sigh, Ethan turned back to his desk. His gaze fell on a framed photo of Lily, taken just last week, She was beaming at the camera, her eyes sparkling with a joy he hadn't seen since before her mother's death. And there, just visible at the edge of the frame, was Emily's hand on Lily's shoulder, a gesture of comfort and connection. The sight made Ethan's chest tighten. How could he reconcile these two versions of Emily? How could he protect Lily without potentially destroying the happiness they had found? As if summoned by his thoughts, a memory surfaced. A conversation he'd had with his late wife years ago, when he was facing a difficult decision at work. "Sometimes," she had said, her eyes full of wisdom beyond her years, "the right choice isn't always the easy one, but it's the one you can live with when you look in the mirror." Ethan closed his eyes, letting the memory wash over him. When he opened them again, his resolve had solidified. He couldn't ignore what he had discovered, but he also couldn't act without giving Emily a chance to explain. With trembling hands, he reached for his phone. It was late, but he knew his old friend from law school, now a respected private investigator, would still be up. "Jake," he said when the call connected, "I need your help. It's complicated." As Ethan outlined the situation, careful to keep names out of it, he could hear the concern in Jake's voice. "Ethan, man, this is serious stuff. Are you sure you want to dig deeper? Sometimes ignorance really is bliss." "I have to know," Ethan replied, his voice firm despite the turmoil in his gut. "For Lily's sake, I have to be sure." After hanging up, Ethan leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. He knew that by involving Jake, he was crossing a line. But the alternative, sending Emily away without knowing the truth, was unthinkable. As he made his way upstairs, Ethan paused outside Lily's room. The door was slightly ajar, and he could hear the soft sound of his daughter's breathing. Peering in, he saw her clutching the stuffed elephant Emily had given her, a peaceful expression on her face. The sight nearly broke him. How could he risk taking away the source of Lily's newfound happiness? But then, how could he not, if it meant keeping her safe? Ethan continued down the hall, his footsteps heavy. As he passed Emily's room, he heard a muffled sound. Was she crying again? His hand hovered over the doorknob, the urge to comfort her warring with his need for answers. In the end, he let his hand fall away. Until he knew the truth, he couldn't trust himself around her. The pull he felt towards Emily was too strong, too dangerous given what he now suspected. Back in his own room, Ethan lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. Images flashed through his mind. Emily's smile as she helped Lily with her homework, the look in her eyes when she thought he wasn't watching, the damning words on the police report. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, Ethan made a silent vow. He would get to the bottom of this, no matter the cost. He owed it to Lily, to the memory of his wife, and yes, even to Emily herself. Little did he know that the path he was about to embark on would lead him to question everything he thought he knew about love, trust, and the true nature of redemption. The coming days would test not just his judgment, but the very foundations of his heart. As Ethan finally drifted into a restless sleep, the first stirrings of movement could be heard from Emily's room. Another day was beginning in the Blackwood household, but it was a day that would set in motion events that would change all their lives forever. The tension in Ethan's study was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. He stood by the window, his back to Emily, unable to face her as he wrestled with the words he needed to say. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink that seemed mockingly beautiful given the turmoil within. "Emily," he began, his voice hoarse with emotion, "I think it's time we talked about your past." The sharp intake of breath behind him told Ethan all he needed to know. He turned slowly, forcing himself to meet Emily's wide, fearful eyes. How much do you know?" she whispered, her usual southern lilt replaced by a tremor of anxiety. Ethan's hand shook slightly as he reached for the folder on his desk. "I know about the police report," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I know you were a suspect in a crime. What I don't know is why you didn't tell me." Emily's face crumpled, tears welling up in her eyes. "I wanted to," she choked out. "God, Ethan, I wanted to tell you every day, but I was so afraid of losing this job, of losing Lily. of losing you." The raw vulnerability in her voice made Ethan's heart clench. He wanted nothing more than to cross the room and take her in his arms, to tell her everything would be all right. But he couldn't. Not yet. Not until he knew the truth. "Tell me everything," he said softly, "please." And so, with tears streaming down her face, Emily began to speak. The story she told was one of small-town politics, family loyalty, and a desperate attempt to protect those she loved. "My brother," she explained, her voice barely above a whisper, "he got mixed up with the wrong crowd. Drugs, mostly. I didn't know how bad it was until the night of the robbery." Ethan listened, spellbound, as Emily recounted how she had unwittingly become an accessory to her brother's crime, how she had driven him to what she thought was a friend's house, only to realize too late that he was robbing a local store. "I didn't know," she insisted, her eyes pleading with Ethan to believe her. "I swear I didn't know. But when I found out, I couldn't turn him in. He's my little brother, Ethan. I've been taking care of him since our parents died." The silence that followed her confession was deafening. Ethan's mind raced, trying to reconcile the Emily he knew, kind, loving, devoted to Lily, with the woman who had harbored a fugitive. "Why didn't you come clean?" he asked finally. "Why keep running?" Emily's laugh was bitter, tinged with regret. "In a small town like mine, once you're labeled a criminal, that's it. There's no second chances. I thought if I could start over somewhere new, be the person I knew I could be." Her voice trailed off, and Ethan found himself finishing the thought. "You could outrun your past." Emily nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I never meant to lie to you, Ethan, or to Lily. You have to believe that. These past few weeks, they've been the happiest of my life. Being here, with you both, it feels like home, like family." The word family hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken emotions. Ethan felt his resolve wavering. He had come into this confrontation prepared to be angry, to demand Emily's immediate departure. But faced with her tears, her honesty, he found himself at a loss. "What about your brother?" he asked, grasping for solid ground. "Where is he now?" Emily's shoulders slumped. "I don't know," she admitted. We had a falling out. He wanted me to help him again, and I refused. That's when I decided to leave town, to start over. I haven't spoken to him since." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. On one hand, Emily had lied to him, had concealed a criminal past that could potentially put Lily at risk. On the other, her actions spoke of loyalty, of sacrifice, of a deep-seated desire to protect those she loved. "Ethan," Emily said softly, taking a tentative step towards him, "I understand if you want me to leave. I'll go, right now, if that's what you think is best. But please, please know that everything I've done since coming here has been genuine. My love for Lily, my feelings for you—" She cut herself off, a blush creeping up her neck. But Ethan had heard enough. In that moment, looking at Emily's tear-stained face, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Stay," he said, his voice rough with emotion. We'll figure this out. Together." Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. "You mean—" Ethan nodded, closing the distance between them. "I mean, I'm not ready to give up on this. On us. What you did was wrong, Emily. But I understand why you did it. And the woman I've come to know over these past weeks, she's someone I want in my life, in Lily's life." As he spoke, Ethan realized the truth of his words. Despite everything, despite the risks and the potential fallout, he couldn't imagine their lives without Emily in it. Emily let out a sob of relief, all but collapsing against Ethan's chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as she cried. "Thank you," she whispered against his shirt. "Thank you for giving me a chance." As they stood there, locked in an embrace that felt both fragile and unbreakable, Ethan knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, both from his family and from Emily's past. But looking down at the woman in his arms, feeling the rightness of her presence in his life, He knew it would be worth it. Outside the study window, the last rays of sunlight faded, giving way to the soft glow of twilight. And in that moment, as day turned to night, Ethan and Emily took their first tentative steps towards a future neither of them had dared to imagine. Little did they know that this moment of reconciliation was just the beginning. The shadows of the past still loomed, ready to test their newfound trust and the strength of their growing bond. But for now, in the quiet of Ethan's study, they allowed themselves to hope, to dream, and to believe in the possibility of second chances. The weeks following Emily's confession brought a delicate dance of trust and uncertainty to the Blackwood household. Ethan found himself caught between his growing feelings for Emily and the lingering doubts that crept in during quiet moments. Yet, as autumn gave way to winter, the warmth within their home seemed to grow stronger, defying the chill outside. One crisp Saturday morning, Ethan stood at the kitchen window, a steaming mug of coffee in his hands. He watched as Emily and Lily built a snowman in the backyard, their laughter carried on the frosty air. The sight brought a smile to his face, even as a familiar pang of guilt tugged at his heart. "You're doing the right thing, you know," a voice said from behind him. Ethan turned to find Mrs. Henderson, their housekeeper of 20 years, giving him a knowing look. "Am I?" Ethan sighed, his gaze drifting back to the scene outside. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm being selfish, putting my feelings ahead of what's best for Lily." Mrs. Henderson clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Mr. Blackwood, in all my years here, I've never seen Lily as happy as she's been these past months. And you—" She paused, a soft smile crossing her weathered face. "Well, let's just say it's good to see you smile again." Before Ethan could respond, the back door burst open, bringing with it a gust of cold air and the sound of Lily's excited chatter. "Daddy, Daddy, come see our snowman. Emily taught me how to make him do a handstand." Ethan couldn't help but chuckle at his daughter's enthusiasm. "A handstand, huh? This I've got to see." As he pulled on his coat and followed Lily outside, Ethan caught Emily's eye. She stood a few feet away, cheeks flushed from the cold, snowflakes clinging to her eyelashes. The look they shared was charged with unspoken emotions, a mixture of gratitude, affection, and something deeper that neither dared name just yet. The day passed in a blur of snowball fights, hot chocolate, and quiet moments by the fire. As evening fell, Ethan found himself alone with Emily in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner while Lily watched a movie in the living room. "Thank you," Emily said softly, her hands submerged in soapy water. "For today, for everything. I know it can't be easy, trusting me after—" Ethan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, silencing her. "Emily, I won't pretend it's been simple, but seeing you with Lily, seeing how much you care, it reminds me every day why I made the choice I did." Emily turned to face him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I promise you, Ethan, I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of that choice." The moment hung between them, heavy with possibility. Ethan found himself leaning in, drawn by an irresistible force. Just as their lips were about to meet, a shrill ring cut through the air. Ethan stepped back, fishing his phone from his pocket with an apologetic smile. His expression darkened as he saw the caller ID. "I'm sorry. I have to take this," he murmured, stepping out of the kitchen. Emily watched him go, her heart racing from the near kiss and the sudden tension in Ethan's posture. She couldn't hear the conversation, but the muffled sounds of Ethan's agitated voice drifted in from the hallway. When he returned several minutes later, his face was a mask of worry. "That was my mother," he explained, running a hand through his hair. "She's insisting on hosting a family dinner next weekend, and she wants to meet you." The color drained from Emily's face. "Your mother? But I thought, won't she—" "Disapprove?" Ethan finished for her, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Probably. But you're a part of our lives now, Emily. It's time my family accepted that." As Emily processed this, a small voice piped up from the doorway. "Is Grandma coming to visit?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Ethan knelt down to his daughter's level. Yes, sweetheart. And she wants to meet Emily. Isn't that nice? Lily's brow furrowed in concentration. But Grandma doesn't like a lot of people. What if she doesn't like Emily? The innocent question hung in the air, voicing the fear that all three of them shared. Ethan glanced up at Emily, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in her eyes. Then we'll just have to show Grandma how special Emily is, Ethan said finally, his voice firm. Because she's family now, right? Lily's face broke into a wide grin. Right! She turned to Emily, holding out her hand. Come on, Emily. We need to practice being extra nice for Grandma. As Lily dragged a laughing Emily back to the living room, Ethan felt a mix of emotions wash over him. Pride in his daughter's acceptance, fear of his mother's judgment, and an overwhelming sense of rightness about the little family they were building. Yet even as he joined them, settling onto the couch with Lily nestled between him and Emily, a nagging worry persisted. His mother's influence was formidable, her expectations for the Blackwood legacy unyielding. And there was still so much about Emily's past that remained uncertain. As the evening wore on and Lily drifted off to sleep, her head resting on Emily's lap, Ethan made a silent vow. He would protect this fragile happiness they had found, no matter the cost. But little did he know that the coming week would test not only his resolve, but the very foundations of the trust he and Emily had built. The shadows of the past were looming, ready to collide with the promise of their future. And as the snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in white, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was brewing, one that would either strengthen their bond or shatter it completely. The Blackwood family estate loomed before them, its Georgian facade a monument to old money and even older expectations. Ethan felt Emily tense beside him as they approached the grand entrance, Lily skipping ahead, oblivious to the tension. "It'll be fine," Ethan murmured, giving Emily's hand a reassuring squeeze. But even as the words left his mouth, he couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. The door swung open before they could knock, revealing Ethan's mother, Constance Blackwood, in all her intimidating glory. Her steel-grey hair was perfectly coiffed, her pearls gleaming in the afternoon light. "Ethan, darling," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "And this must be the famous Emily we've heard so little about." Emily stepped forward, extending her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Blackwood. Thank you for having us." Constance's gaze swept over Emily, taking in her modest dress and nervous smile. For a moment, Ethan thought his mother might refuse the handshake. But then, with a grace born of years of social maneuvering, Constance took Emily's hand. "Welcome to our home," she said, her tone polite but cool. "Please come in. Dinner will be served shortly." As they followed Constance into the opulent foyer, Ethan couldn't help but notice the way Emily's eyes widened, taking in the crystal chandeliers and priceless artwork. He felt a pang of guilt, realizing how different this world must seem from the one she grew up in. The next hour passed in a blur of forced small talk and thinly veiled interrogation. Constance probed Emily about her background, her education, her family. To her credit, Emily held her own, answering each question with a poise that made Ethan's heart swell with pride. It wasn't until they were seated at the dining table, the first course being served, that the evening took a sharp turn. "So, Emily," Constance began, her voice deceptively casual, "tell me about your time in Millbrook. It must have been quite eventful." Emily's fork clattered against her plate. "I'm sorry," she stammered, her face paling. Ethan felt his stomach drop. How did his mother know about Millbrook? He'd been careful not to mention the name of Emily's hometown, knowing the risk of his mother's extensive social connections. Constance's smile was razor-sharp. "Oh, come now. Surely you remember. It was quite the scandal, wasn't it? A robbery? A young woman implicated?" "Mother," Ethan cut in, his voice low with warning. "That's enough." But Constance was relentless. "I'm only trying to understand the kind of person my son has brought into our lives, into my granddaughter's life." Emily stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Excuse me," she whispered, fleeing the room. The silence that followed was deafening. Lily looked between the adults, confusion and fear evident on her small face. "Why is Emily sad?" she asked, her lower lip trembling. Ethan rose, fixing his mother with a look of barely contained fury. "I don't know what game you're playing, Mother, but it ends now. Emily is a part of our family, whether you like it or not." He turned to follow Emily, but Constance's next words stopped him cold. "Are you so sure about that, Ethan? Because my sources tell me there's much more to her story than she's let on. Did you know her brother was recently released from prison, or that he's been asking around about her whereabouts?" Ethan felt as if the ground had dropped out from beneath him. He hadn't known. Despite all their talks, all the trust they'd built, Emily had kept this from him. With a heavy heart, he made his way to the garden, where he found Emily sitting on a stone bench, her face in her hands. "Is it true?" he asked softly, settling beside her. "About your brother?" Emily looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and filled with a mixture of guilt and fear. "Yes," she whispered. "I found out last week. I was going to tell you, Ethan, I swear. I was just scared." Ethan felt a war of emotions raging within him. Anger at the deception, fear for what it might mean, and an overwhelming desire to protect both Emily and Lily. "What does he want?" Ethan asked, dreading the answer. Emily's laugh was hollow. "What he always wants. Money, a place to hide. He thinks because I'm working for a rich family now, I can help him start over." Ethan's mind raced, trying to process this new information. He thought of Lily, of the happiness Emily had brought into their lives. But he also thought of his responsibilities, of the potential danger this situation posed. "We'll figure this out," he said finally, taking Emily's hand in his. "Together. But no more secrets, Emily. I need to be able to trust you completely." Emily nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I never meant for any of this to happen. I love you and Lily so much. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you." Their moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. They looked up to see Constance, her expression unreadable. "I think," she said, her voice cool and measured, "that we have much to discuss." As they made their way back into the house, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something monumental. The truth was out, but at what cost? And what new challenges would Emily's brother bring to their fragile happiness? Little did they know that this revelation was just the beginning. The coming days would test not only their love, but their very concept of family, trust, and redemption. As the sun set over the Blackwood estate, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn, the stage was set for a confrontation that would change all their lives forever. The words hung in the air between them, the first time either had spoken of love. Despite everything, Ethan felt his heart swell. The tension in Ethan's study was palpable as he paced back and forth, his mind racing with the implications of Emily's revelation. Emily sat on the edge of a leather armchair, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. Constance watched them both from her position by the fireplace, her face an inscrutable mask. "Let me get this straight," Ethan said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Your brother, the one who was involved in the robbery, is now out of prison and looking for you?" Emily nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, he thinks I owe him for not turning him in back then." Constance's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Well, isn't this a fine mess you've brought to our doorstep, Miss Parker?" "Mother, please," Ethan warned, his tone carrying an edge of steel. He turned back to Emily, his expression softening. "What exactly does he want?" Emily's eyes met his, filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Money, mostly. A fresh start. He thinks because I work for you, I have access to resources." The implication hung heavy in the air. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine as he considered the potential threat to his family, to Lily. "Out of the question," Constance declared, her voice brooking no argument. "Ethan, you cannot seriously be considering indulging this criminal." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but was cut off by a soft knock at the door. Mrs. Henderson poked her head in, her face etched with concern. I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Blackwood, but there's a man at the front gate. He's quite insistent on speaking with Miss Emily. The colour drained from Emily's face. It's him, she whispered. He found me. For a moment, the room was silent save for the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Then Ethan straightened, his jaw set with resolve. Mrs. Henderson, please make sure Lily stays in her room. Emily, you'll stay here with my mother. I'll deal with this. Ethan, no! Emily cried, leaping to her feet. You don't know Jake. He can be dangerous when he's desperate. Constance's eyes narrowed at this new information. All the more reason for you to stay out of sight, my dear. Let Ethan handle this situation you've brought upon us. Ethan silenced them both with a raised hand. This isn't up for debate. I'll talk to him, see what he wants. Maybe we can resolve this peacefully. As he strode out of the study, Ethan could feel the weight of Emily's worried gaze on his back. He steeled himself, knowing that the next few minutes could change everything. The man waiting at the gate was a far cry from the hardened criminal Ethan had imagined. Jake Parker was thin to the point of gauntness, his clothes hanging loosely on his frame. But there was a feverish intensity in his eyes that set Ethan on edge. "Where's my sister?" Jake demanded as soon as Ethan approached. "I know she's here. I need to talk to her." Ethan kept his voice calm and measured. "Mr. Parker, I'm Ethan Blackwood. I'm Emily's employer. She's told me about your situation." Jake's laugh was bitter. "Employer? Is that what she's calling it? Listen, man, I don't care what kind of arrangement you two have. I just need to see my sister." "That's not going to happen right now," Ethan said firmly, "but I'm willing to listen to what you have to say. What is it you want from Emily?" For a moment, Jake's bravado faltered, revealing a glimpse of the scared young man beneath. I need help, okay? I did my time, but no one will give me a chance. Emily's all I've got left." Ethan felt a pang of sympathy, despite his better judgment. He thought of Emily, of the sacrifices she'd made for her brother. "I might be able to help you," he said carefully, "but I need your word that you'll leave Emily alone. No more showing up unannounced, no more demands." Jake's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What kind of help are we talking about?" "A job," Ethan said, the idea forming even as he spoke. "At one of my company's factories. It's honest work, a chance to start over, but it's in another state, far from here." The offer hung in the air between them. Jake seemed to wrestle with himself, torn between desperation and pride. Finally, he nodded. Okay, I'll do it. But I need to see Emily first, to say goodbye." Ethan hesitated, weighing the risks. Then, with a sigh, he pulled out his phone. "Emily, it's safe to come out now. Your brother's here." The reunion between Emily and Jake was a complex tapestry of emotions: relief, anger, love, and lingering resentment, all woven together. Ethan watched from a distance, giving them privacy while remaining close enough to intervene if necessary. As Emily and Jake talked, their voices rising and falling with the ebb and flow of their shared history, Ethan felt a presence at his side. He turned to find his mother standing there, her expression unreadable. "You're taking an awful risk," Constance said quietly, "for both of them." Ethan nodded, his eyes never leaving Emily. "I know. But sometimes, Mother, the greatest risk is not taking one at all." Constance was silent for a long moment. Then, to Ethan's surprise, she placed a hand on his arm. "You truly love her, don't you?" The question caught Ethan off guard. He turned to face his mother, seeing not judgment in her eyes, but a glimmer of understanding. "I do," he said simply. "She and Lily, they're my world now." Constance's sigh was heavy with resignation and, perhaps, a touch of admiration. "Then I suppose we'd better make sure this plan of yours works. The Blackwood name still carries some weight. I'll make a few calls, smooth the way for Mr. Parker's new start." Ethan felt a rush of gratitude towards his mother, realizing that in her own way she was offering her blessing. "Thank you," he said softly. As they watched Emily embrace her brother one last time, Ethan felt a sense of hope blossoming in his chest. They had weathered this storm together, emerging stronger for it, But even as Jake's car disappeared down the driveway and Emily turned to Ethan with tears of relief in her eyes, a nagging doubt lingered in the back of his mind. Was this truly the end of their troubles, or merely the calm before an even greater storm? Little did Ethan know that the true test of their love and trust was yet to come. As night fell over the Blackwood estate, the pieces were already in motion for a revelation that would shake the very foundations of the life they were building together. The weeks following Jake's departure had brought a tentative peace to the Blackwood household. Ethan watched with a mixture of joy and lingering apprehension as Emily seemed to blossom, unburdened by the weight of her past. Lily, too, sensed the change, her laughter filling the house more frequently than ever. But on a crisp autumn evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, the fragile normalcy they had built came crashing down with a single phone call. Ethan's phone buzzed insistently, Jake's name flashing on the screen. With an apologetic glance at Emily, he answered, "Jake, is everything all right?" The voice on the other end was panicked, barely coherent. "Ethan, man, I messed up. I messed up bad. They're coming for me, and they might come for Emily too." Ethan felt his blood run cold. "Slow down, Jake. Who's coming? What happened?" As Jake spilled out a frantic confession, Ethan's face grew increasingly pale. Emily watched him with growing alarm, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. "I understand," Ethan said finally, his voice tight. "Stay where you are. I'll handle this." He ended the call and turned to Emily, his expression grave. "We need to talk, now." In the study, with Lily safely occupied by Mrs. Henderson, Ethan paced the floor, struggling to find the right words. Emily sat rigid in her chair, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "Jake's in trouble," Ethan began, his voice carefully controlled. He got involved with some dangerous people from his past." Emily's face crumpled. "Oh God, what has he done now?" Ethan took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he had to say next. "Emily, he told me everything, about the original robbery, about why you really left town, and I think it's time you told me the whole truth, too." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily's eyes widened with a mix of fear and resignation. "Ethan, Please," Ethan interrupted, kneeling before her and taking her hands in his. "No more secrets, no more half-truths. I love you, Emily, but I need to know what we're really dealing with here." Tears spilled down Emily's cheeks as she nodded, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she began to tell the story she had kept hidden for so long. "I wasn't just covering for Jake that night," she confessed. "I was there. I was part of it. Not the robbery itself, but I was the getaway driver." Ethan felt as if the wind had been knocked out of him. He had suspected there was more to the story, but this was beyond what he had imagined. Emily continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. "We were desperate. Our parents were gone. Jake was mixed up with these guys, and they threatened to hurt him if I didn't help. I thought I was protecting him." As Emily's tale unfolded, Ethan listened with a growing sense of both horror and understanding. The depths of her sacrifice, the weight of the guilt she had carried all these years. It was almost too much to bear. "After that night, I couldn't live with myself," Emily said, her voice breaking. "I turned myself into the police, told them everything. But there wasn't enough evidence to convict anyone else. Jake got away clean, and I took the fall." Ethan's mind reeled. "But the police report, it said you were only a suspect." Emily nodded, wiping away her tears. "The detective, he believed me. Saw that I was just a scared kid trying to protect her brother. He gave me a chance to start over. Told me to leave town, make a new life. But he warned me that if I ever got in trouble again." The implications hung heavy in the air. Ethan stood, moving to the window as he tried to process everything he had learned. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. It seemed a fitting metaphor for the darkness that had crept into their lives. "Ethan," Emily said softly, her voice trembling, "I understand if this changes everything. If you want me to leave, No." Ethan's response was immediate and firm. He turned back to her, his eyes blazing with an intensity that took Emily's breath away. "You're not going anywhere. We're in this together now." He crossed the room in 2 long strides, pulling Emily to her feet and into his arms. "What you did was wrong," he murmured into her hair. "But I understand why you did it, and the woman you've become, the woman I fell in love with, that's the real you, Emily, not the scared girl who made a mistake all those years ago." Emily clung to him, her body shaking with sobs of relief and lingering fear. "But Jake," she whispered, "what are we going to do?" Ethan pulled back slightly, cupping Emily's face in his hands. "We're going to fix this, together. No more running, no more hiding. It's time to face this head on." As they stood there, forehead to forehead, Ethan felt a sense of clarity wash over him. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with legal and personal challenges, but he knew, with a certainty that ran bone deep, that they would weather this storm. "I love you," Emily breathed, her eyes shining with a mixture of tears and hope. "God help me. I love you so much." Ethan's response was to pull her close, sealing his promise with a kiss that spoke of forgiveness, understanding, and a love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger for it. As night fell over the Blackwood estate, Ethan and Emily began to formulate a plan. They would contact Ethan's lawyers, reach out to the detective who had given Emily a second chance all those years ago. They would face whatever consequences came their way, but they would face them together. And as they finally emerged from the study, hand in hand, to check on Lily, Ethan felt a profound sense of peace. The truth, in all its complicated, messy glory, was finally out. And though challenges lay ahead, he knew that the foundation they had built, one of love, trust, and second chances, was strong enough to withstand whatever storms might come. Little did they know that their journey was far from over. The coming days would test their resolve, their love, and their newfound honesty. But as they tucked Lily into bed that night, her innocent face peaceful in sleep, Ethan and Emily shared a look of quiet determination. Whatever the future held, they would face it as a family, bound not by blood, but by the unbreakable bonds of love and forgiveness.
Thank you very much for listening to this story. Comment below what you thought of the ending and from which city you're listening to us. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, click on the next story that's appearing on your screen now. Leave your like and subscribe to our channel so we can build a huge community that shares inspiring stories together. See you soon.